So exercise number 6. To finance a new health insurance program, the government of Melonia imposes a new $2 per hour payroll tax to be paid by employers. Sub-exercise A. What do you expect to happen to wages and the size of workforce? Okay. So what you might expect, so this is 6A, is that the new tax, could reduce cash wages by the entire amount of the tax. Yes, so if there is a $2 per hour payroll tax, what you could which the employers and not the employees, so the workers have to pay. What you might expect is that if people before were receiving $10 per hour, now they would receive $8 per hour because the employer would fully transfer the burden of this tax on the employees, on the workforce of the economy. And the reason is because labor supply tends to be inelastic. So labor supply tends to be inelastic. And the reason is simply because for employees, which are part of the labor supply, so they're supplying their labor to companies, to firms, which are the demand side, they are quite inelastic because you have a lot of kind of transaction costs if you're trying to change your job. Because first of all, there is an uncertainty related to this because you do not know how long you will be unemployed, how fast you will find another job. In addition, there is uncertainty related to the new job, and it might be that you have to move away from the place where you're right now. So there are a lot of costs involved in simply changing your job. And for this reason, people tend to stick to their jobs that they already have, even though if they're slightly unhappy because of those transaction costs. And this translates into the labor supply to be inelastic. And additionally, what we have here is that the same tax will be imposed on every job. Okay, and the tax will be imposed on every job in Melonia. So if you want to switch your job because of this tax and you're staying in Melonia, there's no way you can avoid this tax because all the jobs will be applied, kind of affected by this. Therefore, the size of the workforce will not change much. In addition, additionally, the tax is used for health insurance. I think it was health insurance. Let me check. Yes, for health insurance, which benefits employees. Yes, so if the tax would be used, for instance, for military or for some other things which do not have a direct effect on people, then they might be less reluctant to accept this tax. But since this tax is explicitly used for health insurance, it could be rather than people seeing this um, tax as kind of a reduction in their wages, it could be seen as an increase in health insurance payments of the government in benefit of the individuals, and therefore it could be seen in a positive way rather than a negative way. But still, but still, wage cuts are very unpopular and employees could reply by working less productive. Okay, so here we assume that there is a fixed amount of salary per hour. So the people would not work less, but they would be working less productive, and this would harm. So this would harm the company. This would harm the employers. So as a consequence, so even if labor supply is inelastic, the employers could carry some of the burden. Yes, so instead of the wages of the individuals being fully reduced by the $2 of the taxes that the employers have to pay, you could see kind of a partial reduction, which is then simply, let's say, $1 reduction of the wage and $1 is paid by the employers in order to make sure that the wages of individuals does not decrease too much, which could have a consequence that harm the employers. Yeah, so this might be a reason why, even though labor supply is inelastic, the employers could carry some of the burden. So sub-exercise B. How will this answer change in markets where labor is inelastically demanded? So if demand for workers is inelastic, which basically means that the demand for workers, so the amount of labor force demanded by the by the demand side, so by firms, is not changing much if the wages are changing. Um, this is kind of the definition of an inelastic demand for workers. Then firms will carry, or firms will have to bear the tax incidence, so wages would not decrease. Okay, so if the demand side is very inelastic, then the consequence of this tax increase will be that the firms will bear the tax, and so the tax will be paid, for instance, by profits rather than reducing the costs of the firms by decreasing the wages. So example, so an example for the demand for workers being inelastic is highly specialized workers. So if a firm has a hard time substituting the current workforce with other workers because they're highly specialized and they have a high education, this might yield an inelastic demand for workers because there are not so many substitutes for them. And the consequence is then that the firm will carry the burden of this tax increase instead of the